Emily raised her eyes to the dazzling blue sky, squinting at the bright California sun, which seemed to pour from the heavens in thick streams, filling everything around with a dazzling light. The heat stung my eyelids, and the skin on my face began to tighten slightly from the perspiration. Although the calendar showed September, nature stubbornly held on to summer. The air was heavy, dense, almost tangible, as if stretched by an invisible film. He shivered over the hot asphalt of a quiet suburban street, and even the bushes along the roadside seemed slightly drooping from the heat. The hot silence, broken only by the chirping of insects and the occasional cries of children, made one feel drowsy. The house she and Mark had just moved into was typical of this tranquil, almost cinematic American town. 2 stories, with a whitewashed wood exterior and roofs painted a faded top. In front of the entrance there was a neat green lawn, as if cut along a line, on which traces of gardening equipment were still visible here and there. The former owners seemed to have been caring for the site until their departure. The white mailbox with the rounded lid still bore someone else's name, written in blue marker on a slightly yellowed sticker. This name now seemed alien and out of place, like a forgotten inscription on a school desk. Emily wiped her sweaty forehead with her palm. Her fingers lingered for a moment on her temple, where a slight headache was throbbing. She looked around. The windows of the neighboring houses seemed dark, as if lifeless, but Emily felt that someone was watching behind the curtains. Subtle movements of the curtains, flickering in the glass, the neighbors, hiding behind the glass, studied the new residents, not yet daring to make contact. She chuckled to herself. The feeling was the same as on the first day at a new school, when the glances of her classmates burned through her back, but no one yet dares to speak. In the distance, where the street curved and disappeared behind the crowns of old plane trees, the sonorous voices of children could be heard. There was probably a playground there, a place full of life, where it smelled of wet metal swings, dust, and juice from cartons. Mixed with these sounds was the appetizing aroma of roasting meat. Surely one of the neighbors had a barbecue in the shade of the backyard. The smell of freshly cut grass, still damp and sticky, tickled the nose, mixing with the smoke and slight bitterness of coal. On the front porch sat a cardboard box sealed with yellow tape, one of the last things Emily pulled out of the trunk. My fingers were slightly numb from the weight, my t-shirt stuck to my back, leaving a feeling of damp fabric, and every step up the creaky wooden steps felt like a dull pain in my lower back. Light jeans, stained with dust and light green grass, treacherously stuck to my legs. She stretched, arching her back and rolling her shoulders until the crunching of her vertebrae felt like a slight relief. It was at this moment, when the hot haze seemed endless, that out of the corner of her eye she noticed a slight movement at the edge of the lawn. Something or someone flashed between the hydrangea bushes. Emily froze, squinting in that direction. The foliage swayed slightly, as if from a light breeze, although the air remained still. She squinted. Maybe a squirrel, or a cat, or maybe one of the children from the neighboring house who decided to take a closer look at the new girl. My heart suddenly beat a little faster. Not from fear, rather from a strange, vague feeling of anticipation, as if this hot day was not just the beginning of the move, but the beginning of something else. Something that lurked in these quiet streets, behind neat hedges and silent windows. Turning around, Emily saw an elderly woman peering through the hedge of the neighboring property. She smiled from ear to ear, waving her hand in a friendly manner. "Hello," Emily greeted, taking a couple of steps towards the fence. She spoke a little louder than usual so she could be heard across the gravel path that separated the areas. "We are your new neighbors. My name is Emily. Welcome to Willow Lane." The woman answered cheerfully with a barely noticeable accent, wiping her hands in gardening gloves on her apron. "I'm Mrs. Chan from house number 47. You must be busy all day today. Totally exhausted, right?" "A little," Emily admitted, puffing. "Moving is not an easy task." Mrs. Chan nodded understandingly, and in this nod one could feel some kind of warm, calm confidence of a person who had lived a long life full of changes. Her face, covered with fine wrinkles, radiated soft kindness and that special affectionate sensitivity that is acquired only with age. Her skin was golden brown, slightly bleached by the sun, and her short gray hair was neatly combed back and secured with a pin in the shape of a cherry blossom. She wore a simple sky blue linen dress with a thin string of pearls around her neck, which gave her appearance a slightly old-fashioned but sophisticated elegance. On his feet were faded but clean slippers, from which his thin ankles peeked out. She held her hands clasped in front of her, and on her right wrist glittered a bracelet of multicolored beads, perhaps a gift from her grandchildren. It's surprising that the first person to greet me was my neighbor's grandmother, Emily thought, looking at her with slight amazement and gratitude. There are no young people around yet. No teenagers on bicycles, no young mothers with strollers, no noisy groups, just this island of friendly old-fashionedness against the backdrop of a bright and hot street. If you need sugar, salt, or anything else, don't hesitate, Mrs. Chan continued, her voice soft, with a slight accent and subtle trembling characteristic of older people. I'll bake cookies this evening, and I'll be sure to bring them to you to try. Emily thanked her with a sincere smile, which, in addition to politeness, showed real gratitude. Something childish flashed in her eyes, perhaps a memory of her grandmother from childhood, who also baked cookies and always kept raspberry jam in the pantry. The warmth of the neighbor's welcome slightly dispelled the fatigue that had accumulated during the day, and that quiet feeling of loneliness that so often comes to new homes, especially when you are alone in them. Emily was a slender woman of about 30, with an open but slightly tired face. The slight tan of her skin indicated that she had been spending a lot of time outside in recent weeks, perhaps in preparation for moving. Her hair, honey brown, was pulled back into a messy bun, with strands sticking out from the heat and sweat. A thin mole on her cheek adorned her face, and shadows lay under her eyes, traces of lack of sleep and overwork. She was wearing a simple white t-shirt and light jeans that were stained at the knees. The sneakers, once snowy white, were covered in road dust. Despite all this, there was confidence in her movements, and in her face there was a lively mind and inner strength, the kind that is born when there is no time for weakness. The woman disappeared into the house, and a moment later silence reigned behind the white door of her porch. Emily stood for a moment and returned to her boxes, feeling the tension in her chest gradually dissipate. Having picked up one of them, the one on which "kitchen" was written in marker, she staggered from the unexpected weight, but still confidently walked towards the door. The steps on the wooden flooring sounded muffled, dust settled on the ankles, and the smell of a new house hung in the air, a mixture of paint, wood, and something subtly familiar, as if the smell of a beginning. The coolness of the air conditioner gently touched the hot skin. The living room was still in chaos. Boxes with labels were piled up everywhere. Kitchen, bedroom, the furniture was haphazard. But even in the midst of this chaos, there was already a feeling of comfort. The house was bright, with wide windows letting in a lot of sun. On the floor lay a massive beige carpet, inherited from the previous owners, and on the wall there was a small stain, reminiscent of a shadow from a photograph that had once hung. Emily carefully lowered the box to the floor and ran her hand along the armrest of the worn leather sofa. New home, new life, she tried to cheer herself up. This move was important for Mark. His promotion and transfer to another branch of the company marked the beginning of a new stage. She hoped that here, away from the bustle of the big city, they would be able to start over with a clean slate. Taking off her dusty gloves, Emily headed to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of cold water. Swallowing the cool liquid, she suddenly felt the tension of the last days gradually subsiding. Maybe things will really get better. She and Mark have been married for 5 years, and although they have had their share of hardships during that time, last year was especially difficult now. It seems fate has given them a chance to find happiness. She automatically stroked her left wrist, where a thin scar reminded her of past stress. The scar almost turned white and no longer hurt, but the memory remained. It's behind, Emily told herself firmly. Stop looking back, it's time to look forward. The glass is empty. Emily took a light vase from the box and filled it with tap water. On the dining table, brought from their previous apartment, there stood a lonely bouquet of field daisies. She picked them on the way here, along the country road. The flowers were cheerfully white with their petals, giving the room a lived-in look. Emily placed the vase nearby and adjusted the stems. Suddenly, a sharp sound was heard from behind the click of the front door. It echoed in the almost empty house, causing the walls to respond with a slight trembling. Emily winced, dropping one of the flowers she had just tried to arrange in a ceramic vase. Her heart sank with unexpected fear. She did not expect Mark to return so quickly. The flower fell softly to the floor, leaving a shadow of pollen on the parquet. "Hey, it's me." A familiar voice came from the hallway, slightly muffled, but filled with familiar warmth. Emily smiled with relief at her own timidity. Still, even after several years of marriage, she could still jump at an unexpected sound, especially in an unfamiliar house. Wiping a drop of sweat from her chin, she walked out into the corridor to meet her husband. Mark was just carrying the last large box over the threshold. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man of about 35, with a slightly casual but charming appearance. His short brown hair was damp with sweat and stuck out slightly in different directions, giving him the look of a tired but happy schoolboy after training. Small drops of moisture covered his forehead, and strands of hair darkened at his temples. A gray-blue shirt, unbuttoned by one button at the top, stuck to his back and shoulders, outlining the silhouette of a trained body, not an athlete, but a man accustomed to working with his hands. The sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing muscular forearms with a slight tan and small scratches, reminders of assembling furniture and lugging boxes. He carefully lowered the box to the floor, with a slight groan, not from pain, but from satisfaction that this was finally the last one. Straightening up, he ran the back of his hand across his forehead, smearing the sweat, and threw his head back, swallowing the hot air with quiet relief. The same half-smile that Emily knew by heart played on his face, tired, kind, and slightly ironic, as if he laughed at difficulties, but still accepted them with an open heart. "Ugh, if these aren't all our belongings, then I officially give up," he said, wiping his hand on his jeans and finally noticing his wife. Warmth and slight concern flashed in his gaze. "How are you holding up?" Emily nodded and came closer, automatically straightening a strand that had fallen out of her bun. At that moment, surrounded by boxes, dust, and the smell of a new home, their gazes intersected, and everything fell into place again. Despite the fatigue, change of scenery, and things still unsorted, they were together. "Which means everything will be fine." "The last one," he exhaled, smiling tiredly. "The rest is already here." Emily came closer and hugged her husband, feeling his heart still racing from the physical exertion. Mark returned the hug by kissing her temple softly. "How are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "Aren't you too stressed?" "Everything is fine," she responded. "I met Mrs. Chan from the neighboring house. A very nice woman promised to bring us cookies." Mark chuckled good-naturedly. "As soon as you moved, you already had girlfriends. No wonder you know how to please people." Emily shrugged, smiling. She ran her hand along his sleeve. "Let's take a break. I'll get you some water. You look exhausted." "It's a great idea," Mark agreed. "Or better yet, a cold shower. It seems that I have collected all the dust from the warehouse on myself." He pulled at the fabric of his shirt and actually raised a cloud of dust. Emily laughed. "Shower, of course, and I'll go after you." Mark, taking off his shoes, noticed a bouquet of daisies standing on the bedside table by the entrance. "Flowers?" He raised an eyebrow. "Did Mrs. Chan bring this?" "No, mine," Emily answered. "There were narwhals along the way, remember. There was a field near the highway." "Oh, exactly. Beautiful." He nodded, but his gaze suddenly seemed to darken, as if some thought had distracted him. A second later, Mark caught himself and smiled again. "Shall I go take a shower, and then we'll order pizza? You probably don't have the strength to cook today." "Exactly," she breathed out with relief. "Pizza is exactly what you need." When her husband disappeared on the second floor, Emily lingered in the hallway, looking at the bouquet. She noticed Mark looked sad for a moment and thought that the wildflowers she picked must have reminded him of something. Maybe about the previous house. There, too, she often put fresh flowers from the market in a vase. Or is it because of last year? Emily took one daisy flower and thoughtfully twirled it between her fingers. My memory recalled how, at the height of their problems, she went to a friend out of town for a week and walked through a meadow full of the same daisies every day, trying to come to her senses. Perhaps Mark also remembered that time. His mistakes at that time were not easy for both of them. But if they were able to survive the last crisis, then even more so now, Emily believed. 40 minutes later, having freshened up with a shower and changed into clean home clothes, the couple sat on the living room floor among the boxes, placing an open box of pizza between them. The TV wasn't connected yet, so they were just talking. It was getting dark outside. Golden light flooded the room, playing with reflections on the walls. "We'll have to go to the supermarket tomorrow," Emily said, taking a bite of pepperoni pizza. "The refrigerator is almost empty." "I thought we'd go to the bedroom tomorrow and sort things out," Mark objected softly. "I would like to quickly end this chaos." "That's also true." She ran her finger over the lid of the box, thinking. "Maybe then I'll go out by myself while you sort out your wardrobe. I'll take a look at the city at the same time." Mark looked at her with slight concern in his eyes. "Sure, the town is completely new to you." "I can handle it," she assured him. "I'm not a child. If anything, GPS will help." The husband nodded, but some tension was still visible on his face. "Okay, whatever you say. Just don't forget your phone, okay? And be careful." Emily smiled. "I will, I promise." "You're so worried, as if I'm going to the desert. It's sure to be a nice, quiet town." Mark tried to smile back. "Yes, quiet. I just want you to feel comfortable." He reached out and covered his wife's hand with his. His hand was warm, slightly rough with calluses. Mark sometimes liked to fix things around the house, make crafts, and this was reflected in his fingers. Emily squeezed his fingers lightly, reassuringly. "I'll be fine," she said softly. "You know, I myself wanted this move no less than you." Mark sighed quietly. "Yes, I know. Sorry, it just happened. New position, move, so many things. Understand. We are a team," she recalled with a smile. "We can handle it together." Her words seemed to cheer him up. He moved closer and kissed her on the lips briefly but tenderly. "I love you," Mark whispered. "Thank you for your support." "And I you," Emily answered, looking into his eyes. She saw in them both weariness and gratitude. At that moment, a soft knock was heard somewhere outside. The couple looked at each other. Mark frowned. It was unlikely that it was Mrs. Chan. She would have used the call. Emily rose to her feet. "I'll open it," she said, heading towards the front door. There was no one on the threshold. The evening air was already beginning to cool, bringing with it the smells of fuchsia and incense from the neighbor's garden. Emily looked around, but there wasn't a soul. Only in the distance, at the intersection, someone's figure was hiding around the bend. Maybe the postman. She looked down and saw a small object on the porch. Emily bent down and picked it up. It was a bottle of red wine tied with a satin ribbon around the neck. There is a white card attached to the bottle. In the twilight, she could hardly make out the block letters on the card. "Happy housewarming, J." "Jay? Who is Jay?" Emily looked at the road, puzzled, but the figure had long disappeared. Do any of the neighbors really greet them in such an original way? She returned to the house holding the bottle. "Who was it?" Mark asked, standing up to meet her. He still had a slice of pizza in his hands. "Nobody. Only now." Emily showed the find. "Someone left wine for us on the porch." With a note, "Happy housewarming," and signed J. Mark stared at the bottle, and in the dim light of the lamp, she noticed how his face had lost color. "J," he repeated slowly. His jaw tensed. "Crap. Do you know who this is from?" Emily was surprised. Mark looked from the bottle to his wife, trying to pull himself together. "Probably one of my old acquaintances," he reluctantly squeezed out. "I didn't even think he was here in the city." "An old friend?" Emily became wary. There was a strange concern in her husband's voice that she had not noticed before. "Who?" Mark put the half-eaten slice of pizza back in the box and wiped his hands with a napkin, even though they were clean. His movements became abrupt. A guy named Jason. We went to high school together not far from here, he finally said. I met him at the warehouse today when I was picking up things. Is it true? And how did he know where we live? Mark shook his head. Probably asked the workers or the real estate agency. I don't know. Emily was still trying to grasp the essence. The sudden appearance of a mysterious friend, a gift on the porch, all this seemed like not quite ordinary friendly attention. Is he your friend? She asked carefully. Mark grinned, but the sound came out strained. More like just a classmate. We didn't communicate much. It's strange that he decided to congratulate. He fell silent, then took the bottle from Emily's hands and carefully examined the label, as if looking for a catch. Emily sensed a tension in him bordering on anxiety. Well, it's a nice gesture, right? She remarked conciliatory. Maybe he just wanted to do something nice. Mark didn't answer. He went to the trash can and suddenly threw the note into it, as if it smelled of something bad. He placed the bottle itself on the kitchen table, but did not uncork it. I don't like all this, he said quietly after a pause. It's better to stay away from Jason. Emily looked at her husband, puzzled. She didn't often see him in this state. Mark was usually balanced and friendly, and then some note unsettled him. Maybe you can explain, what kind of person is Jason? She asked softly, trying not to alarm his withdrawn mood. Mark ran his hand through his hair, then along his chin. The stubble had grown a little during the day and rustled under his fingers. He looked like he was struggling with a difficult decision. I don't want to go into details, he finally answered evasively. Old things. I'm just not glad he showed up. Emily did not press, although everything inside was turned upside down with curiosity and incipient anxiety. If this person was an unpleasant part of Mark's past, perhaps it was best not to really bother asking, at least for now. She sighed quietly and took her husband's arm. Okay, let's not talk about him, she said conciliatory. We have an important stage ahead. Let's focus on our own. Mark nodded gratefully and tried to smile, although he wasn't very convincing. You're right, he agreed. Sorry for getting wound up. It's okay, Emily pressed her cheek against his shoulder. Maybe we should go to bed early. We're terribly tired. Yes, perhaps, he responded, hugging her. As they walked up the stairs, Emily took one last look at the kitchen table, where a hastily discarded bottle of red wine with a scarlet ribbon glinted. In the cozy silence of the new home, this gift looked somehow alien, disturbing the peace. She turned away, trying to push away the unpleasant feeling, and followed her husband into the dimness of the bedroom, hoping that the morning would bring clarity and relief. But that night she had disturbing dreams, vague silhouettes in the windows and whispers behind the walls, which she could not make out. The next day, Sunday morning, greeted them with bright sun and a cool breeze, pleasantly refreshing after yesterday's stuffiness. Emily woke up early. The unusual surroundings were always the first thing to awaken her alertness. For some time, she lay looking at the unfamiliar ceiling of the bedroom, listening to new sounds, the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the clucking of chickens from distant neighbors, the barely audible noise of a passing car. Mark slept peacefully next to her, with his back turned to her, breathing evenly. Carefully getting out of bed so as not to wake her husband, Emily put on a light robe and went downstairs. The kitchen still smelled of yesterday's pizza and cardboard boxes. She opened the window, letting in fresh air and the chirping of birds. Today they have a lot to do. Dismantle the bedroom, put the house in order. But first, breakfast. Emily filled the coffee maker with water and ground beans, glad that at least they had unpacked this appliance first. While the coffee was brewing, she searched through the boxes for her meager food supplies. I found a packet of oatmeal, nut butter, and bananas. Not a lot, but should be enough for a couple of days. Having poured 2 mugs of aromatic coffee, she returned upstairs. Mark was just waking up, rubbing his face with his palm. His hair stuck out in all directions after sleeping. Good morning, Emily said quietly, handing him the mug. Strong, just the way you like it. Mark gratefully took the coffee and took a sip, squinting with pleasure. Savior, he muttered, his voice hoarse from sleep. Kind. Emily sat down on the edge of the bed next to her. Mark put the mug on the nightstand and touched her hand. "How did you sleep?" he asked, looking at her face. "You're kind of pale." Emily shrugged. "I had stupid dreams." She was probably nervous about the move. He nodded understandingly and ran his finger over her cheek. "It's all behind. Now we are here and everything will be fine." His confidence had a calming effect. Emily smiled and lightly pressed her forehead against his, feeling the familiar warmth. "I know," she whispered. An hour later, having washed and had breakfast with oatmeal, they began to sort out things in the bedroom. There was enough work: hanging clothes, putting books on shelves, moving a heavy chest of drawers to the wall. Time flew by unnoticed with all the hassle. Emily, standing on a stepladder, was trying to reach the top shelf of the built-in closet with boxes of winter clothes, when suddenly a bell rang from below. "Door?" she asked Mark, who was holding the ladder. He glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. "It's not even 10. Who could it be?" He frowned. Emily went downstairs, feeling unexpectedly anxious. She remembered yesterday's mysterious gift. But maybe it's just Mrs. Chan with the promised cookies. There was indeed a neighbor on the threshold, and not alone. Next to the petite Mrs. Chan stood a tall man in his early 30s, with a short dark beard and a friendly smile. He was holding a plastic container in his hands, from which came the smell of fresh baked goods. "Good morning again," Mrs. Chan said cheerfully as Emily opened the door. "I'll come to you with cookies, as promised. And so, I met your friend on the way. He also decided to stop by." The man took a step forward and extended his free hand for a handshake. "Hello, Emily. I hope I'm not too early. I'm Jason, Mark's classmate." Emily was a little taken aback, for a second not knowing how to react. The name, which just yesterday had become a source of anxiety and heavy thoughts for Mark, now found a face lively, ordinary, and not at all frightening. Before her stood a man whose unexpected appearance seemed to bifurcate reality. Her expectations did not coincide with what she saw, and this, perhaps, was even a little confusing. Jason looked completely normal, even a little unassuming. He was wearing simple, slightly worn jeans and a light linen shirt, casually tucked in at one side. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and there were faint freckles on his forearms, an odd but cute detail that gave him a slightly schoolboy look. His dark hair was tousled, as if he had just taken off his cap or was driving with the window open. A reddish tint appeared in the strands at the temples, which caught the sunlight like copper. Brown eyes looked straight, openly, without a shadow of tension, with that light, benevolent mockery that people who know how to be the life of the party often carry behind their shoulders, but without undue pressure. He was of average height, with a relaxed but confident posture, not brash, but not shy either. In his hands he held a small paper bag, perhaps containing something like a symbolic gift or baked goods, a gesture that was both polite and a little formal. Emily found herself thinking that it was difficult to reconcile this guy polite, ordinary, as if he had come out of some cozy TV series with the anxieties that tormented her husband yesterday. I remembered Mark's nervousness, his intense gaze, and evasive answers. I also remembered the phrase, "Just an old friend, long time no see." Now the old friend stood on her porch, smiling with such simplicity that all speculation seemed almost funny. But something about this moment still made Emily tense, not because Jason seemed dangerous, no. Simply because sometimes the most difficult things are hidden behind the ordinary. She quickly pulled herself together and smiled politely. "Oh, good morning. Yes, Mark said that you met yesterday. Jason, right?" "That's right," he confirmed and smiled wider. His hand, shaking hers, was warm and dry. "I left you a bottle yesterday. I hope you found it." "Yes, thank you. Very kind of you," Emily replied. "Come in, please, both of you." She stepped back to let the guests into the house. Her heart suddenly began to beat faster from excitement or vague anxiety. She couldn't say it herself. Mrs. Chan went straight to the kitchen, glad to be able to help the young housewife. "I won't be long. I'll just pass on the cookies," she explained as she walked. Jason froze on the threshold of the living room, looking around the situation. His gaze slid over the unpacked boxes and stopped at the stairs, where a wary Mark had already appeared. Mark descended slowly, looking intently at the uninvited guest. Emily cast a reassuring glance at her husband, hoping to ease the tension in the air. "Hi, Mark," Jason said quietly, raising his eyebrows slightly, as if experiencing slight awkwardness. "Hi," Mark answered dryly, coming down and standing next to his wife. His hand rested on Emily's shoulder almost possessively. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Jason shrugged. "I thought why not stop by, since you're neighbors now? Besides, we didn't really talk yesterday." Emily noticed how the muscles in Mark's jaw tensed. He felt it too and tried to soften his expression. "I see," he said evenly. "Well, thanks for the wine." "Always glad," Jason responded. "I'm glad that you settled on our street. Greenfield is a great place." "Greenfield?" Emily asked. "That's the name of our town," Mrs. Chan explained, looking out from the kitchen. "Welcome to Greenfield." "That's a beautiful name," Emily smiled, nodding to the guests. "Jason, do you live somewhere nearby?" "Yes, literally 2 blocks from here, on Maple Drive," he replied. "I have a small house there. I inherited it from my parents." "It's very convenient to have old acquaintances nearby," Mrs. Chan remarked, took the tray of cookies out of the container, and stood next to her, enjoying the conversation. "Mark is lucky. He won't be bored." Mark smiled tightly. "Yes, the old friendship." Emily tensed, noticing the sarcastic tone in her husband's voice. To prevent the conversation from going in the wrong direction, she cordially invited, "Maybe we can all have coffee together. I just brewed a fresh one." "With pleasure," Jason nodded. "I guess it's time. The baby is waiting for me at home." Mrs. Chan trotted towards the exit. "I just stopped by for a minute." "Glad you met." Emily hugged her neighbor goodbye gratefully. "Thank you very much for the cookies." "You're welcome. I'll stop by again later if you don't mind." The old lady winked and disappeared behind the door. The lock clicked softly. There was silence in the house. Emily could hear the fan humming softly in the upstairs bedroom. She turned to the men and clapped her hands vigorously. "Well, coffee. Get comfortable, Jason." She motioned for the guest to go into the living room and quickly slipped into the kitchen to get some mugs. When she returned with a tray, 2 cups of coffee, and a glass of iced tea for herself, she saw that the men sat opposite each other. Mark leaned on the arm of the sofa, crossing his arms over his chest, and Jason sat down on the stool that Emily had managed to remove from the box. Both were silent, and the silence was tense. "Here you go." Emily handed out the mugs, trying to remain casual. "The house is still a mess, sorry. There's nowhere to sit." "It's okay," Jason responded, taking his coffee. "I remember when I moved, I spent a week sorting things out." Mark chuckled. "How long have you been living here?" "Since birth," Jason answered simply, taking a sip. "I left to study for a couple of years, but then returned. My parents were sick, and I had to help. Now here, one is here." "I'm sorry," Emily said sincerely, sympathetically. "Are your parents gone?" "Yes, they've been gone for a couple of years," Jason nodded. His eyes darkened slightly with a surge of sadness, but he quickly controlled himself. "I'm used to being independent." "What do you do?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Do you work here?" "I have a small business, repairing and servicing computers," he answered willingly. "I work at home mostly. I go to clients on call. Greenfield is a small town, but there is plenty of work. Everyone is now tied to technology." Emily smiled. "It's great when you can work for yourself." She glanced at Mark. He darkened, apparently hearing how casually she was talking with Jason. To get her husband involved, Emily asked, "Mark, by the way, you also had a youth in this city." The husband nodded, looking intensely at the guest. "Was. But not for long. We moved here when I was 15, and after school I immediately went to study and work in Chicago." "Yes, Mark was our school star," Jason grinned, putting down his empty mug. "Captain of the basketball team, prom king." Mark abruptly put his cup down on the table so that the coffee splashed onto the saucer. "That's enough," he interrupted dryly. This is all nonsense. Emily even flinched in surprise. A viscous silence hung for several seconds. Jason raised his palms in conciliation. Sorry, didn't mean to embarrass you. I just remember my school days, it's funny. Mark shook his head gloomily. Nothing funny. To diffuse the situation, Emily laughed awkwardly. Well, Mark is just being modest. To be honest, I don't know much about his school years. He doesn't like to talk. And now, you see, he doesn't like praise. Mark glanced at her, filled with concern. He didn't seem to like the direction of the conversation. Jason sighed quietly and stood up. I think it's time for me to go. It was nice to see you and meet you, Emily. Already, she was taken aback, feeling that the meeting was awkward. She didn't want their acquaintance to end there despite the tension. She liked Jason for his openness. Besides, she hoped to understand why Mark was so cold towards him. Yes, there is a lot to do. I don't want to distract you from your troubles. Jason nodded towards the boxes. He turned to Mark, expecting at least neutral parting words. Mark, putting his hands in his pockets, said dryly, Come on, see you sometime. Jason smiled faintly. Certainly. Good luck with your home improvement. When the door closed behind the guest, Emily turned to her husband with indignation. Mark, what was that now? He was already heading towards the stairs, avoiding her gaze. Nothing. He came himself, it's unclear why, he muttered. Emily hurried after him, feeling the irritation growing inside her. Came out of friendliness, in my opinion. He brought a gift and talked. You were just terribly rude. Mark stopped in the middle of the stairs and turned around sharply. Listen, I didn't call him. Why on earth is he even bothering? Emily was startled by her husband's sudden change in tone. She climbed a step higher, almost level with him. He was trying to show concern, she objected hotly. And you acted as if he were your enemy. Mark clenched his hand on the railing until his knuckles turned white. You don't understand. It's better to stay away from such people. Which ones? She was taken aback. Jason looked absolutely normal. Very nice, polite. It was you who did not let the conversation go smoothly. You cut it off at every word. The husband sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He seemed to be trying to cope with his irritation. That's enough, he said more quietly. Just believe me, it's better for me not to contact him. And you too. Emily frowned, feeling offended and misunderstood. Why? Explain something, she exclaimed. Mark tiredly leaned his back against the wall of the staircase. There were a couple of unpleasant stories at school in which he was involved. I don't want to stir things up. Unpleasant stories? She asked, narrowing her eyes skeptically. For example? Mark turned away, looking out the window at a bird flying past. What difference does it make now, Emily? This was almost 15 years ago. Teenagers can be cruel and stupid. What matters is what we have become now. She saw his throat tremble as he swallowed. For a moment, it seemed that something similar to pain flashed in his eyes. Okay, Emily said carefully, coming closer and touching his hand. If you don't want to, don't tell me. But Mark, isn't it better to clear things up once and for all? Maybe you're trying to avoid him in vain? Mark shook his head. No, not in vain. And I don't want to talk about it anymore. With these words, he broke their intimacy, climbing further up the steps. Emily remained standing where she was. A feeling of annoyance fought within her with incipient anxiety. She suddenly realized that this was the first time she had seen Mark like this. Secretive, irritable, even angry. It was scary. A minute later, she heard him begin to move furniture in the bedroom, loudly and frantically. It was as if he was taking out his anger on the chest of drawers and boxes. Emily closed her eyes and took a slow breath. What happened between them? There was a pounding in her temples. And what did Jason do to deserve such hatred? So far there have been no answers. Only a quarrel with her husband, a residue of understatement, and a premonition that a quiet life in Greenfield might not be as quiet as she had dreamed. On Monday morning, Mark left for work a little before 8, quickly kissing Emily at the door. His brow was furrowed with concern. It was clear that the anxiety from yesterday was in no hurry to let go. Emily watched her husband go. The silver SUV disappeared around the bend, leaving her alone in a quiet house. She stood on the porch for a little longer, looking around. The street slowly came to life. A neighbor across the house was walking his shaggy retriever. A young mother in a tracksuit was pushing a stroller. Typical suburban morning, measured, peaceful, not at all similar to the confusion of her thoughts. Emily's chest was still tingling from yesterday's confrontation with Mark. Walking back in, she got down to business, tidying up the kitchen and unpacking the remaining boxes in the pantry. However, it was impossible to concentrate. My thoughts stubbornly returned to Jason's figure and Mark's strange behavior. To clear her head, Emily turned on the radio. A country song was playing softly and took out her phone. Unread messages from her best friend Julia, left over the weekend, flashed on the screen. "How did you get there?" "Well, is the house okay?" "How are you?" Emily bit her lip guiltily, realizing that she had completely fallen out of virtual life due to her troubles. She texted her friend a short reply. "Hi, everything is fine. We are figuring it out little by little. I'll call you later and tell you." After sending the message, I suddenly felt an urgent need to really talk to someone. Communication with Julia always benefited her. They had been friends since their student years. Julia knew almost everything about her, including about the difficult last year. Emily dialed the voice call. The friend answered almost immediately. "Honey, hello." Julia's cheerful voice rang out. "I thought you disappeared on your new planet." Emily chuckled lightly. "Hello, sorry, there was a blockage. How are you?" "I'm fine. Let's talk about you better. How is the road? How is the house? Mark, I hope he hasn't gone crazy at his new job." Emily walked around the living room, looking at the rays of light on the floor. "The house is nice, big. The area is quiet. The neighbors seem friendly." "Like," Julia noted. "I hear some doubt." Emily hesitated, then sighed. "It's just. Not everything is smooth in my soul. I don't understand it myself." Mark met an old friend from school here and didn't seem happy about it. "An acquaintance? What friend?" "A guy named Jason. They studied together." Emily sat down on the arm of the sofa, fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt with her free hand. And Julia hurried. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," Emily admitted honestly. "Mark is acting strange. Yesterday Jason came to say hello to us, and Mark was downright rude to him. I didn't expect this from my husband." "Jealousy?" suggested a friend with playful notes. "Maybe he's afraid that a competitor is on the horizon." Emily shook her head, although Julia couldn't see it. "No, that's not the point. They've clearly fought in the past, but Mark doesn't want to talk. You know how he can be. He will close and not say a word." "I know," Julia said, stubborn. "Listen, have you seen this Jason yourself? How is he in general?" "Quite normal. Very friendly, sweet. He gave us wine and spoke politely. I even tried to joke about my school days, and Mark got mad. It's funny." Julia thought for a second. "Maybe your husband wasn't a good boy at school. Anything can happen." Emily shivered. This thought also occurred to her. "I thought about that too," she admitted. "Maybe he's ashamed to remember something." "Well, the way is simple. Since he is silent, find out from the second participant," the friend remarked practically. "If it's so important for you to know what kind of skeleton is hiding there." "Find out? How is that?" "Ask Jason directly. What happened there?" "Why not?" Julia chuckled. "You can be more careful, make friends, and then the conversation will come out on its own." Emily imagined herself going to investigate Jason and shook her head uncertainty. "I'm afraid it might not be nice for Mark." "Is it nice to act like a gloomy baboon towards your new acquaintance?" My friend retorted. "Okay, it's up to you. But I would definitely find out what's what. Fewer mysteries, stronger marriage." The last phrase made Emily smile. Julia always knew how to diffuse a situation. "You're right. Probably. I'll look at the situation." "That's great. So, keep me posted, will you? Because you're far away, I'm worried." "Definitely," Emily said softly. "Thank you for listening." "Nonsense. We are friends. Take care of yourself. Kisses. After disconnecting the call, Emily felt a little better. By formulating her doubts out loud, she understood them better herself. Yes, she is worried about the incomprehensible secret that has come between her and her husband. And yes, she wants to know the truth. She spent the rest of the morning doing household chores, trying not to think too much. By noon, following her plan, Emily got ready to go to the supermarket. She threw her wallet into her purse, checked that her shopping list was there. A list was carelessly written with a pen on a piece of paper. Milk, eggs, bread, vegetables, coffee. She got into her old sedan, turned on the air conditioning and the navigator. The nearest supermarket was 10 minutes away. The engine hummed softly as the car pulled out of Willow Lane. Emily peered into the unfamiliar streets, trying to remember the way. Here was the post office, here was a park with a wooden playground, then a gas station and a small shopping center. Greenfield really looked calm, almost like a toy town. Hedges, front gardens, American flags at some doors like in films about an ideal province. The supermarket smelled of baked goods and air conditioning. Emily wandered the aisles, filling her cart. She even managed to distract herself from her worries for a while. She was thinking about what sauce to get for her pasta when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Emily? Hello. She turned around. Jason was approaching her with a basket in his hands. Pleasant surprise was reflected on his face. Oh, hi, Emily smiled involuntarily. It's a small world, right? The same supermarket on the outskirts of the city where everyone goes, he joked. It's surprising that we crossed paths. She noticed that Jason looked a little more tired than yesterday. There were light shadows under his eyes. Maybe he didn't sleep well. However, the smile was sincere. How is life for newlyweds in a new place? He asked me. We're figuring it out little by little, she answered. Moving along the shelf, he caught up. Today, I decided to replenish my supplies. Right. But guys, they can eat pizza for a week, Jason winked. Emily laughed quietly. Yes, we have already checked. By the way, thanks again for that pizza. We were too tired, and this really saved us. He hesitated for a second, clearly not understanding. Emily explained. We haven't opened the wine yet, but we ordered pizza in the evening. It's just, you came yesterday, you actually helped us out with breakfast, Jason. She was confused, feeling like she was talking nonsense out of embarrassment. But Jason smiled. You're welcome. They stopped at the bread section. Emily took a packet of baguette. In the silence that hung for a moment, she wanted to talk about what worried her. Listen. She began hesitantly, looking into the basket where the carrots and a pack of tea lay. Sorry, it was awkward yesterday. Mark is not himself. Jason nodded softly. Yes, I noticed. Don't worry, everything is fine. I probably shouldn't have shown up without warning. No, you have nothing to do with it, she hastily objected. It's him. I just didn't expect such a reaction from him. Jason was silent for a moment, then asked quietly, Did he tell you anything? Well, about school, about me. Emily shook her head. Not quite. There were just some unpleasant stories that he does not want to talk about. I see. Jason lowered his gaze. You know, I'm sorry if my appearance caused discord among you. I wouldn't want to. Emily felt the sincerity in his words and a sudden strange desire to reassure him. It's not your fault, she said with conviction. I'm just trying to understand. It seems like you haven't done anything bad to us. He smiled sadly from the corner of his mouth. Emily, the past is a complicated thing. I think Mark isn't happy to see me because he's embarrassed. Ashamed, she asked again, holding her breath. Jason ran his hand over his goatee, searching for words. We didn't get along at school. Or rather, I was not from his circle. He is a popular athlete, he has his own company, and I am so. A computer nerd. Emily imagined a young, awkward Jason with books, walking past a group of beaming athletes, and smiled sadly. Yes, a classic of the genre. Exactly, he grinned too. Well, a couple of times the guys made fun of me. Tough, let's say. Mark was in charge. Emily held her breath. Here it is, the truth is revealed. What did they do? She asked carefully. Jason looked her straight in the eye. Yes, this is nonsense, he said evasively. It was unpleasant then, but it passed. Adults should not harbor grudges about children's affairs. Emily felt both relieved that she was getting some answers and disappointed at the evasiveness. This means that Mark once offended Jason. Was her husband really the school bully? It's hard to believe, looking at him now, although the outbursts of rage that she saw made her wonder. Are you really not angry? She asked quietly. Let's just say it wasn't easy for me back then, Jason admitted, turning to the baked goods display. But I'm glad that Mark achieved everything and got settled. To be honest, I even envied him once. He suddenly stopped short, as if he thought he had said too much. Emily noticed the tension in the line of his shoulders. Jealous? She asked softly. Jason shrugged. Well, he's one of those guys for whom everything is easy. Sports, friends, girls, and I had a hard time. But again, that was a long time ago. He turned to her again. Something sad and serious was reflected in his eyes. Just please don't quarrel over me. Mark, I'm sure he loves you more than life itself. It must be unpleasant for him to remember who he was. Emily lowered her head. My heart suddenly felt pity for the teenage Jason, who was bullied, and for the young Mark, who may now regret what he had done. You know, she said quietly, I think he's really ashamed. But instead of apologizing, he chose to run away and forget. Perhaps, Jason agreed. Not everyone knows how to admit mistakes, especially years later. Emily thought about it. There was wisdom in Jason's words, a kind of weariness, as if he had long outgrown that long-standing drama. It was calming. They continued choosing food, talking about lighter things. Jason told a couple of funny stories from local life about how a deer recently wandered through the streets after wandering from the forest, how firefighters hold a barbecue competition every year. Emily laughed and felt her tension melt away. At the checkout, as she was paying, Jason, standing behind him with his basket, suddenly asked, Listen, let's have some coffee and chat quietly. Emily turned around in surprise. He hastened to add, I mean, the three of us, of course, if Mark wants. Or, if he's busy, we'll just chat. I'd tell you about the city. You live here now, it must be interesting. The proposal seemed quite innocent. Indeed, it would be nice for her to know more about Greenfield and its inhabitants. But how will Mark react? Although, if you don't tell him, no, keeping secrets in secret is a bad idea. Let's try the three of us, she decided, handing the cashier a bill. I think when everything settles down, Mark won't mind either. Jason smiled. Great. I admit I was friends with almost no one at school, except for a couple of the same crazy gamers. So the idea of catching up on lost communication warms me. Emily smiled back at him, picking up the grocery bags. See you soon then, and thanks for the conversation. My pleasure. See you, he said goodbye. Already approaching the car, Emily suddenly realized that her mood had improved significantly. Although the conversation did not completely reveal the secret, it relieved the tension. Jason seemed quite well-intentioned. Maybe it's true, just an unlucky classmate who was once played too cruelly. If he himself does not hold a grudge, then it would seem there is nothing to worry about. However, in the depths of my soul, an unpleasant aftertaste remained. Mark was in charge of bullying. These words did not fit with the image of the loving husband she knew. How much does she still not know about him? In the evening, Mark returned noticeably tired. Emily greeted him on the threshold with a smile, but immediately felt the tension it seemed to come with him. He mechanically kissed her on the cheek, without even taking off his shoes, and walked into the living room, sitting down heavily on the sofa. How was the first day? She asked cheerfully, following him. It's fine, Mark said briefly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Lots of introductions, my head is spinning. Emily stopped next to her, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Do you want to eat? I made pasta with chicken. Later, he responded, leaning his head on the back of the sofa and closing his eyes. She sat down next to him and gently touched his hand. "You're irritated. Did something happen?" Mark opened his eyes and looked directly at her for the first time. The look was tired, but wary. "No, it's just, it's okay, really." Emily decided not to push. She understood that talking about Jason was inappropriate now. Instead, she talked about how she went grocery shopping, how nice Greenfield was, and even mentioned the story about the deer that Jason told her, but she didn't name the source. Mark listened with half an ear and nodded. Finally, when she paused, he said, "I'll take a quick shower now." He stood up and headed up. Emily watched him go, feeling a pang of disappointment. The husband was clearly distant. Perhaps work, fatigue, nerves, she reassured herself. But I wanted to return at least a grain of their former closeness. During dinner, Mark perked up a little, praised the pasta, and talked about the new boss. Emily kept up the conversation. It seemed to her that the tension was slowly subsiding. After eating, they moved into the living room, where Emily put on music soft jazz. Mark settled into a chair with a tablet, looking through work documents. She took the book, settling down on the sofa. This time, the silence was peaceful, domestic. But the peace did not last long. When it became completely dark outside and the house was enveloped in a soft semi-darkness, the silence was broken by the ringing of the entrance intercom. A low, intermittent beep made both of them flinch. Who could it be at such a time? Mark muttered, glancing at his wristwatch. It was about 9 in the evening. Emily put the book down. "I'll take a look." She went to the intercom. The screen showed the view of the porch from the camera. The silhouette of a man stood at the door. Emily squinted. It was dark, but there seemed to be familiar outlines. "This is Jason," she said, turning to Mark. "Why is he at night?" Mark had already stood up. His eyes narrowed. He looked wary, even hostile. "Don't open it," he said quietly. Emily was taken aback. "What? Why? He might be on business." The call was repeated, more insistently. Mark came closer. "They don't go without an invitation at a time like this. You never know what he needs." Emily hesitated. It would be rude not to answer, especially since she saw no reason for such hostility. On the other hand, I also don't want to aggravate the conflict with my husband. She pressed the intercom button. "Jason, this is Emily. What's happened?" A voice muffled by the speaker reached them. "Sorry for disturbing you. Is Mark home?" Emily looked at her husband in surprise. He stood gloomier than a cloud, but nodded to her, saying, "Answer." "Yes, he's here," she said to the speaker. "And what?" "I wanted it just for a couple of minutes," Jason said with a hint of excitement. "I promise I won't take too much time." Emily turned down the volume on the intercom and whispered to Mark. "Maybe we can let you in. He didn't just come." Mark pursed his lips and his eyes flashed with anger. But apparently realizing that he would not dissuade him, he said briefly, "Cold." Emily pressed the button to open the lock. A few seconds later, footsteps were heard, and Jason appeared on the threshold of the living room. He was without a jacket, wearing only a shirt, although it was already cool outside. Excited face. "Sorry for bursting in," he said immediately, "but I have urgent business." "What's happened?" Emily was wary. Jason reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He handed it to Mark. "Are these yours? You apparently dropped it in my yard. I just found it near the gate." Mark stared blankly at the keys, but Emily immediately recognized the keychain with the symbol of his company. "That's right, Mark. These are your office keys. You've been looking for them all day today," she exclaimed. Mark slowly took the bundle from Jason's hands. The expression on his face was strange, a mixture of relief and embarrassed anger. "Thank you," he muttered. "But where do they come from in your yard?" Jason spread his hands. "Don't know. After your quarrel yesterday, remember, you came in the evening, you suddenly dropped it when you left. I only noticed now when I went out to take out the trash." Emily turned her gaze to her husband. "Did you go to Jason yesterday?" She didn't know about it. Mark did not say that he saw him alone. Mark was silent, clutching the keys in his hand. Jason was also waiting for an answer, looking at his old acquaintance expectantly. Finally, Mark squeezed out. Yes, it came out. Impulsively. I wanted to clarify the situation, but nothing came of it. They only quarreled worse. Emily sank heavily onto the sofa, digesting the discovery. So, while she was sleeping or in the bathroom, Mark went to see Jason. And he didn't say a word. And you didn't even tell me, she said disappointedly. Mark turned to her. I didn't want to worry you, and there wasn't much to talk about. Apparently, there was something to be said, she quietly noted. There was an awkward silence. Jason shifted from foot to foot. I'm sorry I got you involved, Emily. I thought he was telling. She shook her head. No, I didn't tell you. Mark glared at Jason. You did your job, thank you. You can go. Emily even opened her mouth slightly from such coldness. But Jason didn't show any offense, he just sighed. Okay, I'll go. He moved towards the exit, but stopped for a moment next to Emily. Once again, I apologize for the intrusion. She barely had time to nod before Jason disappeared out the door. Mark, without saying another word, walked into the office and closed the door. Emily was left alone in the dimly lit living room. She felt her heart thumping dully. New questions swarmed in my head. What happened between the men last night? Why did Mark go to Jason, and what didn't they share? But it was impossible to ask now Mark was clearly not in the mood to talk. Looking at the closed office door behind which her husband had disappeared, Emily suddenly felt weak. Events developed, gaining momentum, and she was still trailing behind, not having time to comprehend. The only thing she knew for sure was that somewhere in the cracks that appeared between her and Mark, the darkness of someone else's past was seeping through. And this darkness was already touching it, creeping into their lives with cold fingers. Wednesday morning was cloudy, which was rare for sunny California. The gray sky hung low, promising rain. Emily sat at the kitchen table, tapping her fingernail on the rim of her cooling cup of coffee. Opposite, on the table, lay her phone, the screen of which showed a new message from Jason. Can we talk? Anytime it's convenient for you. He sent it late in the evening, after he had left, returning the keys to Mark. Emily noticed the message only in the morning, and for half an hour she could not decide to respond. After yesterday's scene in the house, the air seemed to thicken, saturated with mistrust. Mark left for work at dawn, quietly and avoiding eye contact. He seemed ashamed or angry or maybe both. Emily was left with a painful feeling of lies, corroding their marriage from the inside. She remembered Julia's advice, find out from the second participant. Jason was clearly ready to talk, and after everything she learned in fits and starts, Emily could no longer stop. She needed to know the truth completely. Gathering her resolve, she typed out the answer. Let's meet. Is morning coming? There's a cafe here on Main Street. 5 minutes later, Jason replied, I'll be there in half an hour. Thank you. Emily quickly got ready and threw on a light cardigan over her t-shirt. Before leaving, she glanced at the mirror in the hallway, dark circles under her eyes, her face tired. She ran a comb through her brown hair and pulled it into a messy ponytail. Still no time for beauty right now, she sighed. The Blue Cactus Cafe was easy to find small, with a bright blue sign and potted cacti at the entrance. It was almost empty inside. It was early, and there were few visitors on weekdays. Emily chose a table in the corner by the window. Faded light streamed from the street. She ordered herself a latte and waited. It will change the way you think about relationships. Don't forget to like. Jason showed up almost exactly 30 minutes later. He entered, shaking the first drops of rain from his hair. Seeing Emily, he immediately went to her. Hello, he said quietly, sitting down opposite. I'm glad you wrote. Emily nodded, smiling briefly at the waitress who brought her latte. Jason ordered an Americano. They were silent for several seconds. Emily was looking for where to start. Jason spoke first. How are you? I mean, after yesterday. Emily lowered her eyes to the cup, where a heart was drawn on the surface of the foam. Honestly, it's bad, she admitted. It seems to me that I am losing ground under my feet. I don't know who to believe. Jason tilted his head in sympathy. I understand. I'm really sorry that you found yourself in the middle of all this. Emily looked up. That's why I asked to meet. I want to know everything, Jason. Entirely. What happened between you and Mark, and why does this continue now? He looked at her for a long time, as if assessing whether she could stand it. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, you have the right to know. I will try to tell you without unnecessary emotions. The waitress placed a cup of Americano in front of him, and Jason took a sip, collecting his thoughts. Mark and I actually went to high school together, he began quietly. As I already said, we communicated little. I was a quiet person, passionate about computers and books. He is popular and athletic. He had his own group of friends. I had a couple of comrades from a mathematical circle. Emily imagined this picture. Jason with a laptop or comic book, Mark with a basketball and a crowd of fans. I never contradicted him, Jason continued. Almost didn't cross paths. But, closer to graduation, one story happened. He looked away towards the window, behind which streams of rain were flowing down the glass. Mark had a girlfriend at the time, Rachel, Jason said quietly. Very beautiful, from the support group. I had nothing to do with her. I barely knew her. But one day, at a classmate's party, Emily noticed how he clenched his hand into a fist on the table. Rachel drank too much, and she felt sick. I happened to be nearby when she locked herself in the bathroom, he continued. I heard that she was vomiting, knocked and asked if she needed help. She unlocked the door, and then Mark and a couple of other friends ran into the bathroom. They saw me next to a drunk Rachel, and Emily already guessed what happened next, but she waited with bated breath and made a fuss like I was approaching her with dirty intentions. Jason finished bitterly. Although I didn't touch her at all, I tried to help, simply give him water and a towel. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. My heart sank. Jason grinned at one corner of his lips. The gesture came out more like a painful grimace. They pushed me out of the house, calling me a pervert and other worse words in front of everyone. Mark shouted that he caught me almost. He paused, almost raping her. Emily's head started spinning. She didn't notice how her hands shook, spilling coffee from the cup onto the saucer. "Oh my God," was all she breathed out. Jason shook his head. That's not all. Then, at school, they convinced everyone of this lie. Rachel was so drunk that she didn't remember anything, and Mark helped her remember. He said that he saved her from me. Poor girl, she believed her boyfriend. Of course, the news spread. He bit his lip and added quietly, they started to bully me. Avoid, whisper behind your back. Several kids from high school beat me up after school a week later. Apparently, they decided to punish the rapist. I got a concussion and a broken arm. The parents wanted to file a complaint with the police, but there was no evidence. Mark denied everything, said that the fight was not his business, and there could be no rumor about the incident with Rachel. They say he didn't tell anyone, they all made it up themselves. Emily could no longer hold back her tears. They stood in the eyes, the world blurred. She literally saw in front of her the boy Jason beaten, humiliated, and her then future husband, lying blatantly to get out. I got pulled out of school, Jason said quietly. In recent months, I have been studying at home, with tutors. I was glad to escape to see these looks every day. And Mark, as far as I know, completed his studies without problems, graduated, and went to college. And that girl, Rachel, Emily asked in a hoarse voice. What Rachel? He shrugged. I think she never fully learned the truth. Over time, they stopped asking her, and I disappeared from the radar. She also left later, I don't know where. Emily ran her hand over her eyes, brushing away the tears. The rain was pounding outside, but inside her soul, the thunder was louder. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Jason, I'm so sorry he did this to you. Jason shook his head. You have nothing to do with it. It was a long time ago. For you, it probably feels like yesterday. She looked at him with sympathy. He didn't answer directly, but pain flashed in his eyes, confirming her words. They were silent for several minutes. Emily didn't know what to say. Her mind was torn by contradictions. She loved Mark, but how could she accept that the man with whom she shared a bed for 5 years was capable of such cruelty and lies? As if reading her thoughts, Jason said quietly, "People change, Emily. I don't think Mark is the same now as he was at school. Perhaps he has grown up and has long-term regrets." "But you don't think so," she stated. Jason curled his fingers around the cup. "I wanted to believe it. Honestly, when I found out that he returned to the city and got married, I became curious what kind of person he turned out to be. I thought that if the opportunity presented itself, I would see it with my own eyes." "And saw it?" she asked quietly. He smiled bitterly. "Alas, he barely recognized me, or rather pretended that he didn't recognize me. And as soon as I realized that I was not keeping my mouth shut, I immediately began to aggressively defend myself. A person who is truly ashamed and regretful would probably try to apologize rather than be rude and threatening." "Threaten?" she asked sharply. "Did he threaten you?" Jason looked away. "Yesterday evening, when you came to me, yes. He shouted that if I didn't leave behind, I would regret it, in rather flowery terms." Emily remembered Mark throwing furniture in the bedroom out of anger, and she shuddered. "Oh my God," she repeated helplessly, covering her face with her hands. They fell silent again. Emily fought the urge to either burst into tears or, on the contrary, scream in anger. The pain for Jason's humiliation was mixed with rage at Mark and with pain for herself. Her own husband lied to her, hid the terrible truth about himself. "Emily," Jason called softly, "sorry for ruining your image of Mark. I know it's not easy." She slowly lowered her hands and looked at him. There is no triumph in his eyes, only sympathy and fatigue. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "Mark himself destroys the image with his actions." Her lips trembled. To calm the trembling, she took a sip of the cooled latte. Episodes of her life with Mark flashed through her head. How he courted her, the proposal on the shore of the lake, their wedding. Everything seemed now at stake. "I have to talk to him," she finally decided, looking up at Jason. "Demand an explanation, an apology." Jason nodded carefully. "Understand, you are a family, and you need to figure it out yourself." He paused, then added, "I'm just afraid Mark might flare up again. He gets very hot-tempered when pushed against the wall." Emily smiled sadly. "I already noticed." She thought about the thin scar on her wrist. Last year, Mark also drove her to the edge of the abyss, not intentionally, but still. His detachment after the loss of their child then, his withdrawal into himself, his coldness, all this drove her into severe depression. And although Mark later came to his senses, surrounded her with care, and literally saved her, the dark hole in her soul remained her own test. And now, it seems, a new challenge is ready to consume her. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said quietly. "I appreciate it, even though it hurts." Jason extended his hand across the table, not touching, but with a gesture full of participation. "If you need help or just to talk, I'm here, okay? I don't want you to suffer because of our old scores." Emily smiled sadly. "You're kind, Jason. Not what Mark is trying to make you out to be. He doesn't know me at all." Jason shook his head. "I don't think I ever knew." "Yes, me too." Emily stood up, feeling every muscle ache from tension. She extended her hand to Jason. "I have to go. I'll text you, okay? Just in case." He also stood up, and unexpectedly, instead of shaking hands, he lightly hugged her briefly, in a friendly way. She didn't pull away. There was not a hint of anything unnecessary in his hug, only support. "Everything will be fine," he said quietly. "No matter what happens, you are stronger than you think." Emily nodded, afraid she would cry again if she spoke. Having collected herself, she turned around and quickly walked out of the cafe into the drizzling rain. She had to face her husband and the truth he was hiding. And although fear constrained her, somewhere inside her determination grew and strengthened to find out everything to the end. Mark came home late. Emily spent the whole morning and afternoon in painful anticipation. She did not write or call him. deciding that the conversation should happen face to face. Out of excitement, she ate almost nothing, and in the evening she felt dizzy. When her husband's steps were heard outside the door, Emily was already standing in the middle of the living room, fiddling with a handkerchief in her hands. My heart was pounding in my throat. The door opened. Mark entered, shaking drops of rain from his hair. Apparently, he had gotten from the car to the porch in the downpour. Seeing his wife standing directly opposite, he froze for a moment, then put on a tired smile. "Hello." "Hi," Emily responded. The voice came out tense. Mark hung the keys, the same ones that had been returned, she thought, on a hook, and pulled off his wet jacket. "What are you doing? Why in the dark?" He looked around. Only one lamp was burning in the living room, casting a dim light. Emily took a deep breath. "It's now or never." "I met with Jason today," she said firmly. Mark froze as if he had been hit. His hand stopped halfway to the knot of his tie. "What?" he asked quietly, but a dangerous note was already ringing in his voice. "I wanted to hear the truth," Emily continued, trying to remain calm. "And I heard her. About Rachel. About that party. About your lies." Mark's face flushed red, then suddenly turned pale. He stepped closer. "He told you nonsense, and you immediately believed it," he snapped. "Emily, how could you?" She took a step back, but held on. "So this is all a lie," she said. "You didn't blame him? Didn't you poison? Didn't you lie to everyone around you?" Mark flinched from each question, as if from a slap in the face. "It was a misunderstanding," he said sharply. "I was trying to protect Rachel. We really thought he was something." He stopped. "But we could have been wrong." "Made a mistake?" Emily's voice broke. She couldn't believe her ears. "But then you continued. You spread rumors. You allowed him to be beaten." "I didn't know anything about the beating," Mark shouted, coming close. His eyes sparkled. "I found out later, and it was already too late." "So you regret it?" she blurted out, looking into his face. Mark was silent, breathing heavily. A drop of rainwater ran down his chin, but he didn't notice. "Tell me, do you regret it, Mark?" she repeated, feeling the tears welling up. "Certainly," he finally exploded. "Of course, damn it, I'm sorry. It was stupidity. I was 17. I was afraid that I would be imprisoned for fighting at that party, so—" "And decided to make him look guilty," Emily whispered, finishing the sentence. "I didn't plan this in advance," Mark said, looking away. "Wrap everything up." "Well, think for yourself. I caught him with my almost unconscious girlfriend. Anyone would have flared up." Emily shook her head, not believing that he was trying to justify himself now. Anyone would have at least apologized later when he realized that he was mistaken. Mark ran his hand over his face, as if in oblivion. "Yes, perhaps. I probably should have." "Was it necessary?" she shouted, and tears still flowed. "You're probably crippled his life. He still lives with it, Mark. Do you think I don't live?" He suddenly growled, hitting the wall nearby with his fist so that the photo frame tinkled. "Do you think it's easy for me? I tried for years to forget this crap, to get it out of my head. I hate myself for that night." Emily recoiled from his outburst. The frame with the wedding photo tilted and crashed to the floor, the glass shattered. There was dead silence for several seconds. Only both were breathing heavily. Then Mark, coming to his senses, wiped his face and stepped towards her, holding out his hand. "Honey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scream." Emily pulled away, not allowing herself to be touched. She was shaking all over. "Why?" she said in a trembling voice. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Mark lowered his hand, hanging his head. "Because I was afraid that I'll lose you." Emily smiled bitterly through her tears. "Aren't you afraid now? It seems like you're doing everything to make it happen." Mark groaned, clasping his hands. "I don't know what to do. I'm panicking, you know. When I saw him, everything came back. I was afraid that he would tell you everything and, well, that's what happened. Damn it." Emily closed her eyes. So many emotions were mixed. Anger, pity, disappointment, love. She still loved this man, no matter what, and that made her doubly painful. "Mark," she said wearily. I need to understand what you really are like. All your sides. And the one who committed a terrible act, too. You understand, right? He was silent. And I need to know that you really repent and are not just afraid of publicity, she added quietly. Mark glanced at her. I repent, he said hotly. Emily, my love, I would give my whole life for this not to happen. I was a fool, a coward, whatever, but I changed. You know me, I'm not a monster. He stepped closer, and this time Emily allowed him to take her hands. His palms were icy. I love you, Mark said, looking into her eyes pleadingly. Everything I do is for us. This move, this job, I just want a normal life, and this ghost from the past. He destroys everything. Emily looked at their clenched hands. He nervously stroked her skin with one finger, as if he was afraid that she would break out. Then maybe stop fighting him, she asked quietly. Admit your guilt, apologize to him. Maybe this will be the end of it. Mark recoiled, as if she had suggested the unthinkable. Apologize? After everything he's already done? He's ruining my marriage, damn it. Emily couldn't believe her ears. He just told the truth, Mark. It is not he who destroys everything, but your lies. I protected you, Mark shouted. I didn't want him to fool you with his fairy tales. Emily pulled her hands away from him, retreating. Enough. Don't make a fool out of me. I see for myself what is true and what is not. Oh, that's how it is. He hissed, and instantly his face changed, stretched out with pain and anger. So you're on his side. No sides, she almost screamed. There is a fact. You committed meanness and did not find the courage to admit it. Neither then nor now. So, Mark took a deep breath. My own wife now considers me a scoundrel and a liar. Emily sobbed. I want to consider you a person capable of repentance. But I haven't seen it yet. Mark collapsed onto the sofa at once, burying his face in his hands. What should I do to make you believe, huh? Do you want me to kneel in front of him, right? Emily suddenly felt terribly tired. She slowly shook her head. I don't want to interfere in your accounts at all. You yourself must clear away the rubble of the past. Otherwise, it will always be between us, you know. He raised his head and looked at her with a fiery gaze. No, it won't be between us. I won't let some guy destroy my family, he muttered. Emily tensed. What are you going to do? Mark walked around the room like an animal in a cage. Don't know, but I have to stop this, if you have to for this. He stopped short. Emily went cold. What will you have to do? Mark, listen to yourself. You speak again as you did then, in a panic, just to save myself. The husband stopped and looked at her hard. Save yourself? No, save us. Don't you understand? If he doesn't back down, you will leave me. I see where this is going. Emily didn't know what to say. She stood surrounded by scattered shards of glass and thought that her marriage was now just as broken. I need to think, she said tiredly. I'll go to Julia for a couple of days. The words were out before she even realized them. But having said that, I realized that there was no other way. She needs space, away from this intensity, to sort out her feelings. Mark flushed. Oh, so you're running. Great. Are you throwing me to the mercy? I'm not quitting, she shook her head, trying to speak evenly. I need time, and for you too, to calm down and think things through. Don't you dare leave. He growled, taking a step and grabbing her shoulders. His fingers clutched painfully. Emily, please. He was no longer angry, he begged, but with force. She felt fear wash over her. This was not the Mark she felt safe with. You're hurting me, she said quietly, looking him straight in the eyes. Mark immediately let go, as if he had been burned. He stepped back, raising his hands. Sorry, I didn't want to. Emily rubbed her shoulders. There will probably be bruises. Do you see? She whispered. We brought each other to this. I need to take a break. Mark lowered his head. All emotions seemed to have come out. All that was left was emptiness. Will you come back? He asked dully. Emily swallowed a lump. Don't know. Hope. He nodded barely. When are you leaving? Still death. Tomorrow morning. Mark sank back onto the sofa as if all the air had been let out of him. Emily couldn't look at him anymore. Her heart was breaking. She quickly walked out of the living room and went upstairs, about to throw something into her suitcase. Behind her, she heard a quiet sound. It seemed that Mark was quietly, powerlessly crying, remaining alone in the darkness of an empty room. Mark sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, staring at the floor. A gray dawn was dawning outside the window. The rain was quietly drumming in the wide open door with the remnants of the night's downpour. The room was permeated with the musty smell of wine spilled on the carpet and the cold morning air. He ran his hands over his face. My eyes were raw, either from insomnia or from tears that broke through in the dead of night. Mark didn't know how long he sat there without moving. Chaos reigned in my head. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face again, distorted with pain and disappointment. And her voice, "I need time. I'll go to Julia." She was still at home. She packed her suitcase in the guest room because their shared bedroom now seemed like a minefield to both of them, with shards of glass on the floor and shattered trust in the air. Mark wanted to go to her at night and beg for forgiveness, but he could not get up. The wine he uncorked in desperation, ironically, the same wine Jason gave him, made his legs feel weak and his head heavy. He got drunk, but oblivion did not come, only dull pain and anger at himself. Now, at dawn, my head was pounding like a hangover hammer. Mark swallowed. His mouth was dry. He stood up, unsteadily, and headed to the bathroom. A man with a rumpled, haggard face and bloodshot eyes looked at him in the mirror. How did I get to this point? He turned on the cold water and stuck his head under the tap. The icy stream sobered up, returning a little more clarity. My memory flashed back to how, at some point during the night, he threw a glass of wine at the wall. A stain on the wallpaper and shards of glass in the corner are proof of this. Well, it added more chaos to the overall picture of destruction. Straightening up, Mark leaned his forehead against the mirror. At the thought that Emily would be leaving in an hour or two, her heart sank to the point of pain. "She'll be back," he feverishly repeated to himself. She promised to think and come back. But was there a firm promise? No, only a vague, "I hope." And the look is extinguished, alien. He had never seen such a look from his wife before. Mark walked back into the bedroom. The sound of footsteps came from the corridor. Emily was going downstairs with a suitcase. It's time. He rushed to the door and ran out onto the landing. Downstairs by the front door, Emily was fiddling with her umbrella and bag. A small suitcase stood nearby. She was dressed in dark jeans and a gray sweater, with a raincoat thrown over her shoulders. Hearing his steps, she raised her head. Their eyes met through the railing. "Are you leaving already?" Mark asked hoarsely, feeling his throat immediately constrict with a spasm. Emily nodded. Her face was pale, but calm, too calm, distant. "Yes, it's easier to leave early in the morning while there is no traffic," she answered quietly. Mark swallowed convulsively. He went down a few steps, not daring to come closer. "Emily," he began, trying to find the words. A million thoughts were spinning, but there was nothing really to say. Everything had already been said in the quarrel. And still, he had to do something, at least something. "Maybe I should go with you. I could explain everything to Julia." She shook her head, cutting him off. "No need. I'm really better off being alone." Alone, this word hit me like a whip. Mark closed his eyes for a moment. "I understand," he whispered. "But I will wait. Do you hear? I realized everything. I'm ready to apologize to anyone, do anything to get you back." Emily lowered her eyes. She gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles turned white. "Just give me time," she repeated tiredly, "and think for yourself what you want." "I want you, us," he snapped. "I don't need anything else." There was desperate sincerity in the voice. Emily closed her eyes painfully and then quickly opened the door. "I'll call," she said, and stepped over the threshold. "Emily," Mark rushed down, but she had already left. The lock clanged. He opened the door, running out into the drizzling morning rain. Emily walked to the car parked by the side of the road. "Emily," he repeated, not feeling the cold drops on his heated face. "I love you." She froze for a second at the driver's door. She turned over her shoulder. A tear slid down her cheek, washed away by the rain. "Take care of yourself, Mark," was all she said. Then she got into the car and slammed the door. The engine began to purr and the headlights flashed. Mark stood on the path barefoot, wearing only tights and a t-shirt, shivering either from the cold or from despair. The sedan slowly drove away from the house and rolled down the street. Mark started to follow, but the car disappeared around the bend. She left. He stood in the middle of the wet road until the neighbor's dog barked somewhere behind the fence, as if condemning him. Then Mark somehow forced himself to return to the house. My legs almost didn't obey me. The living room was in chaos. Yesterday's fragments of the mirror frame were still lying on the floor. On the sofa there is a rumpled pillow, which he pressed to his chest at night instead of the woman he loved. Mark sank into a chair, feeling water dripping from his hair and clothes onto the floor. What now? He lost his job for today. No, what kind of job? He wrote a rambling letter to his boss at night that he was taking time off for health reasons. They probably thought that he couldn't cope with his nerves after the move. Yes, it's really close. Mark covered his face with his hands. He wanted to be anywhere but here. I wanted to turn off my consciousness, stop thinking, because every spotlight of thought was aimed at one thing. I destroyed everything. She won't come back anymore. No, he jumped in his chair, straightening up. This is not possible. Something needs to be done. Correct. To prove that he is not a monster, that he deserves to be with her. What? What can he do now? Apologize to Jason like she asked. But it's already too late. This won't bring her back right away. And where is the guarantee that Jason won't turn her completely against him? Mark suddenly vividly imagined. She'll come to her friend's place, and then maybe Jason will show up. He'll find out. She will tell her that she did the right thing by leaving. Maybe he will be able to console Emily. This thought caused a burning flame to flare up in my chest. Jealousy, humiliation, powerlessness, everything was mixed up. Mark jumped up, wringing his fingers. No, you can't sit and wait. We need to act. He will not allow anyone to take his wife away from him. And that someone is Jason. Everything went downhill because of him, because of his appearance. If it weren't for him, if only he had just left them alone like he had left them all these years. Mark darted around the living room like a caged tiger. With each circle, anger and pain clouded the mind more and more. His gaze fell on the long key to the barn hanging on a hook. Nearby is Emily's umbrella, forgotten in her haste. Her shoes were neatly displayed by the bedside table. These little things in the house, reminiscent of her, hurt like glass. This won't happen, he muttered, grabbing the key. With instant clarity, Mark decided that while Emily was away, he would deal with the source of the problem. He will make Jason disappear from their lives once and for all. Let him clean up, move, hide, it doesn't matter. If only he didn't say another word or look in Emily's direction. Weave an intrigue, set up his wife. Jason is good at this, Mark believed. But he can't do anything against a conversation between man and man. And if he doesn't understand in an amicable way, well, Mark is already at his limit. He has nothing to lose. He quickly got dressed, jeans, jacket, sneakers on his bare feet. He didn't even really lace them up. He went out, grabbing the car keys. But he didn't start it. The drive was about 10 minutes, and driving drunk couldn't be worse. Besides, the rain had almost stopped. It was just drizzling. The fresh air will cool your head a little. Mark walked down the street. Fortunately, there was no one at such a time. Everyone was at work or sleeping. He pulled his hood up and put his hands in his pockets. The wind rustled in the maple crowns, and large drops fell from them onto the sidewalk. Blood was pounding in his ears, but with each passing minute, as he approached Maple Drive, Mark felt an increasingly icy calm. Here is Jason's house, a modest one-story house surrounded by a low picket fence. It's a little dark in the windows. Maybe he's still sleeping, or where has he gone? No, the light of a lamp is visible in the corner of the curtain. At home. Mark silently opened the gate. There was a pair of worn-out shoes on the porch, and a rug with the inscription "Welcome" by the door. "Ha, as if you are happy to have guests," Mark thought sarcastically. He pressed the bell button forcefully. Once, twice. Footsteps were heard inside. The door opened. Jason, in jeans and a t-shirt, looked surprised. "Mark," he began. But Mark didn't let him come to his senses. He pushed the door sharply, crashing into the opening. Jason took a step back, dodging, but Mark grabbed him by the collar of his t-shirt. "Are you happy now?" He barked in his opponent's face. "Let me out." "Are you crazy?" Jason tried to unclench his fingers. Mark pushed him against the wall. Jason, having lost his balance, thudded with his back against the coat rack at the entrance. It swayed, and something fell from above. "All because of you," Mark raged, pressing him against the wall with his forearm. "You think I don't know what you're trying to achieve? You ruined my marriage, you bastard." "Mark, stop it." Jason squeezed out, trying to dodge the saliva splashing in his face. "You're drunk." "Yes, drunk." Mark punched the wall next to Jason's head, leaving a dent in the drywall. And angry as hell, Jason jerked and managed to push Mark a little to the side. He tried to slip past to the exit, but Mark, without losing speed, twisted his arm and threw him again, this time to the floor of the corridor. Jason fell, hitting his elbow. He winced in pain. "How long are you going to ruin my life?" Mark shouted, towering over him. "What did you do then?" "Again, you were missing something, decided to finish it off." Jason struggled to his hands and knees, crawling back a little. "What nonsense. It's you," he croaked. "I? What am I?" Mark kicked the bedside table standing against the wall, which toppled over with a roar. "Was it me who spread lies? It was I who returned to your life, not you to mine. We lived calmly, calmly, until you showed up." His chest heaved violently. Jason backed away, holding his bruised side. Mark noticed that the skin on his elbow was cut. Blood was dripping onto the parquet floor. "But I didn't feel pity, only gloomy satisfaction. That's what you need." "I came to apologize, fool," Jason suddenly shouted, looking up at him. "Last night, I didn't mean to harm you. I wanted to hand over the keys and stop everything before it's too late." "You're lying." Mark jerked towards him and grabbed him by the shoulder. "You wanted to destroy my family. You're probably gloating now. Well done, Emily. Leave that monster." "Yes, no." Jason shook his head, his eyes sparkling with indignation. "You destroy everything yourself, not me." "Shut up." Mark barked and punched Jason in the cheekbone. He screamed in pain and fell on his side. Mark shook his bruised hand, feeling his knuckles ache. But adrenaline drove me forward. He bent down, grabbed his opponent by the chest, and jerked him to his feet, then again pressed him against the wall. "If she doesn't come back." Mark muttered, bringing his face close to Jason's. "If she files for divorce, I will kill you, I swear." His eyes were crazy, and Jason was finally really scared. He stopped resisting, only began to breathe rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. "Heard?" Mark growled, glaring. "I'll kill, and I don't care what happens to me." "You've already said everything," Jason said quietly. "You can leave." For some reason, these words sobered Mark up for a moment. He was holding Jason's clothes, but suddenly noticed his reflection in the mirrored closet opposite. Red face, twisted with anger, wet hair falling out, really crazy. Mark loosened his grip. Jason carefully pulled himself free, pressing his hand to his cut lip. In the silence that followed, only the heavy breathing of both could be heard. Mark suddenly felt incredibly tired. It was as if all the strength had been drained from him. He stepped back, releasing Jason completely. He straightened up, wincing in pain, but stood firm. Mark didn't take his eyes off him, still waiting for a trick or a retaliatory strike, but Jason just shook his head. "I never thought that you could fall so low," he said in a choked voice. "You need help, Mark." "Shut up," Mark breathed, amazed at how exhausted his words sounded. He suddenly realized that he was out of breath, as if after a marathon. "Get out," Jason said hoarsely, gesturing toward the door, until I called the police. Mark smiled wryly. Police. Yes, he probably deserved it now. He hesitated. The blood of rage was still pounding loudly in his temples, but fear was already mixed in. We're not finished yet, he threatened formally, but his voice sounded tired. Jason didn't answer. He just looked hard, with pity and anger at the same time. Mark turned around and walked towards the exit, trying to maintain at least a shadow of dignity in his posture. My hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving a sickening emptiness. He went out onto the porch. Mark, Jason suddenly called out from the door. He looked over his shoulder without saying a word. I recorded our conversation, Jason said clearly, and yesterday too. Mark froze. My heart sank to my feet. Did you write it down? If something happens to me or Emily, Jason continued loudly, these recordings will go to the police and your colleagues, so you better calm down. The anger, which had already seemed to have subsided, again slashed Mark with heat, but immediately subsided, giving way to frightening clarity. He keeps me on the hook. Jason had it all figured out. Without answering a word, Mark took off and rushed away along the path. The gate hit the post behind him with a thud. He almost ran down the street, not making out the road, cursing Jason, himself, and the whole world. When his friend Willow Lane greeted him with the silence of an empty house, Mark felt it was all over. Fury gave way to icy horror. He went inside, slamming the door shut, and slowly slid down it to the floor. Jason's bloody face and his words stood before my eyes. I recorded our conversation. How much has he said? The threat to kill is enough to put him in prison for a long time. This is crazy. Mark put his head in his hands and groaned, rocking. What did he do? And now what? Now he's definitely lost Emily. If Jason wants, she will know about this breakdown, this violence. It probably couldn't have been worse. His life was completely collapsing, like a house of cards, and he himself knocked out the last support. Mark hid in the corner of the hallway, tucking his knees, and gave free rein to tears bitter ones, bursting out of his chest in spasms of sobs. There was no one to see his shame, and there was no longer any strength left to restrain himself. Emily returned to Greenfield at sunset that day. The hidden sun turned the ragged remains of the rain clouds crimson. The journey home, if home could now be called, that took less time than the morning departure. All these hours behind the wheel, she constantly thought about Jason's call, which found her at Julia's around noon. He said that Mark came to see him. Jason could be heard having difficulty speaking. She later learned that he had a split lip and a bruise on his cheekbone. Mark hit him, threatened to kill. Emily listened, not believing that all this was being said about her husband. Jason assured him that he would be fine and that Mark had left. He didn't call the police, at least not yet. He only asked to make sure that Emily herself was okay. Fearing the worst, she immediately said goodbye to the preoccupied Julia and headed back. My heart was pounding with anxiety. How is Mark? Did his anger explode further or, on the contrary, cool down, leaving behind a void? Willow Lane was empty and quiet. The Chan's house glowed with cozy lights, and the evening lamps of other houses also lit up. Their window remained dark. Emily parked the car and got out. The air was fresh, smelling of wet earth and ozone, as often happens after a thunderstorm. She found the door of her house unlocked. Emily pushed her and froze on the threshold. In the hallway, on the floor, Mark was sitting, leaning his back against the wall. The knees are pulled up to the chest. The face is hidden in folded hands. He did not move at the sound of the door opening. He seemed to have fallen into oblivion or sleep. Mark, she called out quietly. He twitched and raised his head. When he saw his wife, he blinked as if in disbelief. Then slowly, clinging to the wall, he rose to his feet. Emily walked in and closed the door. There was no light in the hallway, and the twilight thickened around them, broken only by a faint glow from the street. "You are back," Mark said hoarsely. His voice was broken, as if he had been screaming or crying for a long time. Emily stepped closer. Now she saw him, Swollen red eyes, disheveled hair, a dirty stain on his t-shirt. There are abrasions and dried blood on her right hand she stabbed. He was the one who cut his knuckles by punching Jason in the face. Jason called me. She answered as calmly as she could. He told me what happened. Mark closed his eyes and a pitiful groan escaped his lips. I'm sorry. He wheezed. I'm sorry. Emily didn't move. She just wrapped her arms around herself to stop shaking. You could have killed him, she said dully. Mark hit the wall behind him with his fist, not hard, more out of despair. I know, Lord. He was breathing heavily, not daring to approach. There was horror in the eyes. I don't know what came over me. He spoke haltingly. More precisely, I know. I was distraught, afraid of losing you, and went to him. This is not an excuse. No, no. He shook his head, stammering. I ruined everything. All. Emily was silent. I watched as he brushed the tears from his face with his hand, not ashamed of them. You found out everything, and I lost it. Mark continued, catching her gaze. He's right, I'm crazy. I need help, I guess. Of course we need it, she agreed quietly. You've needed help for a long time, Mark. He closed his mouth, holding back a sob. Then he nodded in agreement. You probably hate me now, he whispered, lowering his eyes. Emily didn't answer right away. She felt great compassion mixed with devastation. There was no hatred, there was bitterness. Before her stood a broken man who had himself destroyed everything he had, and perhaps realizing it too late. I don't know what I feel, she finally said honestly. This is beyond words. Mark sobbed and took a step towards her. I beg, give me a chance to improve. I'll beg on my knees. And without finishing, he actually dropped to his knees. Emily screamed in surprise. Mark, get up. She rushed towards him, trying to lift him by the shoulders. But he only grabbed her tighter around the waist, pressing his forehead to her stomach. Don't go, he cried. Please, Emily, I'll do whatever you want. I'm sick, I'll get treatment. Just don't leave me forever. Emily froze, shocked. She ran her hand through his tangled hair, feeling the salty moisture, either rain or tears, on her palm. Her heart was breaking. Hush, she said almost tenderly. Hush. I'm here. Mark raised his face to her. There is hope and fear at the same time in the eyes. Here, but not with me, right? He said. She closed her eyes. How to answer? She didn't want to finish him off, but she couldn't lie either. Mark, she said firmly, I can't be with you like before now. I don't know if I ever will. You hurt me too much. Too scared. He let go of her and sat down on the floor, not taking his eyes off her. Tears kept flowing down his cheeks, but he listened more attentively, holding his breath. Remember, you said that you loved me more than life itself, Emily continued, swallowing a lump. But look what you did. Love is not like that. A loving person will not cause such pain, will not endanger another. We have an unhealthy relationship right now, and I don't want to continue like this. Mark sat dumbfounded, afraid to utter a word. She saw him trembling, but it needed to be said. I want you to take care of yourself, she said softly. I went to a specialist. I will help you find a good psychologist. I dealt with anger, with guilt, with all this burden. Without this, you will destroy yourself. And you? He asked in a weak voice. What will you do? Emily smiled sadly. Try to come to your senses. I also need help to get through all this. Today, I experienced so many feelings in one day that it's still like a dream. Mark nodded several times, as if in agreement, although his eyes darted. So, you're leaving? He asked quietly. Emily squatted down opposite her so she could be on the same level. He pulled his hands towards her, but resisted, clenching his palms. Yes, she answered honestly. I think we need to separate at least for a while. Or maybe forever. He covered his face with his hands. She heard his intermittent breathing, but no longer tears apparently. He had cried everything out. I don't want to lose you, came muffledly from behind the palms. And I didn't want to, she replied, but perhaps this is the only way. At least for now. They fell silent. Emily gave him time to digest the words. She herself needed the courage to stand through this conversation, but she held on for both of their sakes. I'll be at Julia's, you know her address. If necessary, we will contact you. But for now, I think it's better for us not to see each other. Mark also stood up, staggering. He suddenly looked much older than his age, as if he had lived a couple of decades in the last few days. "Can I at least give you one last hug?" he asked pleadingly. Emily looked at him so pitiful, broken, and could not refuse. She stepped forward and gave him a short, tight hug. I felt him inhaling the smell of her hair, how he was holding back so as not to burst into tears again. "Goodbye, Mark," she whispered, pulling away first. He wanted to say something, but his voice broke. He just nodded and ran his trembling hand over her cheek one last time. Emily turned and opened the door. Her heart ached, but she knew she couldn't go back. For some time she did not hear footsteps behind her, but when she stepped onto the path, she still looked back. Mark stood on the threshold, leaning his shoulder on the doorframe. In the ensuing darkness, his silhouette looked doomed. He didn't try to hold her anymore. He just watched as she walked away. Emily looked down and walked to the car. Tears flowed down her face in streams, covering the road. She sat down in the salon, closed the door, and burst into tears loudly, giving vent to the pain. In the house opposite, silhouettes began to move apparently. The neighbors had noticed, but she didn't care. Now she herself must live this moment of farewell. After crying a little, she wiped her face with her sleeve and started the engine. The headlights snatched from the darkness, the familiar porch, and the same red ribbon from the bottle, now lying in a puddle by the road. A bitter smile touched Emily's lips. How symbolic it all turned out. The car moved off gently. Mark did not move, following her with his eyes. Emily looked in the rearview mirror. His figure gradually diminished until it was completely hidden in the darkness. She drove through the night town, where now there was nothing left that would hold her. There was a long way ahead to a friend, and then, perhaps, a new life. Without lies, without fear, without constant pain. She still didn't know how she would cope, but somewhere inside there was a strange feeling. Maybe now everything would go differently. Outside the window, the dark silhouettes of trees swayed in the wind, but the sky in the east was already beginning to brighten. The storm has passed, leaving behind ruins. But among the fragments of the past, Emily carried away the most important thing herself. I'm alive, and therefore still capable of being happy someday. At Julia's, Emily slept without nightmares for the first time in months. In the mornings, she drove to neighboring Greenfield to visit Jason to make sure that the bruise and cut lip were really going away. Conversations began awkwardly. Cups of coffee, a warm veranda, the smell of resin after the rain. But after just a couple of meetings, Emily found herself feeling like she was returning home not to that White House with cracked trust, but to a person who listens and never raises her voice. One day, Jason offered to show her to the morning farmer's market. Emily only agreed because she still needed to buy honey for Julia. The market smelled of vanilla donuts on the wind. Jason bought two, sprinkled them with powdered sugar, and awkwardly handed half of them to her. Later she would understand. It was at that moment, when the sugar melted on her lips, and Jason laughed and unconsciously wiped away the crumbs with his thumb, that her heart clicked completely. It was still sweet on the tongue when a thought flashed in my head. I've loved him for a long time, from our first coffee. I was just afraid to admit it to myself. No kissing happened for another 3 days. Emily was tormented by her conscience. Legally, she was still Mark's wife. But on the evening of the 4th day, when they were switching the veranda to winter mode and covering the cacti with burlap, Jason took her palms, looking into the very center of her pupils. I think we both know where this is going. But I won't take a step until you're free, Emily replied simply. I'm already free, with my heart. Mark, meanwhile, kept his word to himself. A psychotherapist, antidepressants, and anger management group. They gave him post-traumatic disorder with outbursts of dissociative violent affect. He honestly worked on himself. and in the evenings he wrote letters to Emily in a thick notebook without an address, just to ask for forgiveness again. He learned about the novel unexpectedly soberly. At the next session, the psychotherapist suggested, "Call your wife without complaints, ask sincerely how she is." Mark dialed the number and heard Emily's quiet laughter on the phone, intertwined with Jason's velvety baritone. She came to her senses and answered, but the pause was enough. Mark understood everything. A couple of days later, he himself invited the two of them to an empty, barely furnished house on Willow Lane. In the living room, there were 3 chairs and a cardboard box instead of a table. "I'm not for a scene of jealousy," Mark began, squeezing a sheet of paper covered in trembling handwriting in his fist. "I'm here to admit I lost the war that I started. Emily, I'll sign the divorce when you say so. Jason, I'm ready to make up for everything I've done." He held out the paper. Peace agreement. His signature was already at the bottom. Emily cried, not from grief, but from relief. The past had finally stopped breathing down their necks. Jason silently shook Mark's hand, and he didn't flinch. The therapy lessons were working. In 4 months, the court approved the divorce. Mark moved to San Diego to live with his sister, continued treatment, and one day sent a postcard. "I'm learning to live without hurting anyone. Thanks for stopping me." Emily and Jason rented a small house near Lake Madeira. In the mornings, they drank coffee on the pier, she with whipped milk, he with black. Sometimes Emily laughed at random and admitted, "You know, I fell in love with you that very day when you handed me a bottle of wine and was embarrassed that you had the wrong door. And I, when I saw you pick up a daisy from the floor and smile as if you saved the whole world," he answered. In early spring, exactly 1 year after moving to Greenfield, Jason gave her a silver ring with a tiny daisy design, a symbol of that day, and he added, "We can go anywhere if there are too many shadows here." Emily smiled. "Shadows are left behind when you walk towards the light. I think we have already chosen the direction." So the story ended not where it began, but where it became truly easy for 2 people to breathe. And the house on Willow Lane still had a sparkling white facade, only new residents soon replaced the old sign on the mailbox. Tova was the only change he managed to notice before closing the last page of this story. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.